Hello, I'm Bret Moss, and you're watching the defining moment for creating the culture of conscience. Our guest today is Dr. Tyler Hendricks. Dr. Hendricks is the president of the Unification Theological Seminary in New York. He served for 5 years as the president of the Holy Spirit Association for the Unification of World Christianity in America. Dr. Hendricks has a Bachelor of Science degree in mathematics from the University of California at Davis, and he earned his master's and PhD in American Church History from Vanderbilt University Graduate School of Religion in Nashville, Tennessee. Additionally, he holds a diploma in religious education from the Unification Theological Seminary. Tyler was born in California and currently lives in New York. He and his wife, Hae-young, from Korea, have 5 children and 1 grandchild. Dr. Tyler Hendricks, welcome to the Defining Moment. It's really a pleasure for me to welcome you here to our show today.
It's great to be here, Bret. Thank you.
Thanks for coming. Our topic today is principles for building a happy, God-centered marriage and family. And I'd like to begin by asking you to share a defining moment from your own life.
It begins when I was 16 years old, and I grew up in California, as you said, and I was living in sort of a transitional situation and came upon a magazine called Horizon Magazine, and there was an article about Zen Buddhism written by a pretty well-known, pretty eminent scholar from Japan, D.T. Suzuki. I'd never heard of Zen Buddhism before, but I was intellectually curious, and more than that, I was spiritually searching, I think. And so I read this article, and it really opened my mind to a different perspective on spirituality. When I thought about spirituality heretofore, I had looked at it from my Christian framework as a Presbyterian. I was a believer, I was a faithful person because my mom prayed for me a lot. Yet through that experience, through that encounter with Zen Buddhism, I realized that there's a vast world, that there's internal dimensions of spirituality that I had not been exposed to for whatever reasons. And so I began to explore. I began to look east, actually. And this led me to opening my mind to really a lot of possibilities in terms of religion, and the feeling that religion is not just something in the church or in a book, but religion is really in everyday life, in your everyday experience, in your encounter with the world, with mundane reality.
It's meant to be like that.
Yes, that mundane reality is not worthless. It is actually sublime, that kind of thing. But to break through, to encounter the sublimity, takes incredible self-discipline. And that attracted me. It sort of fascinated me. And so that began, I think, a quest that led me to when I was engaged with a woman from Korea, and the culture of the Buddhist culture, the Confucianist culture. And this was a related defining moment. If the first one was on an individual level, the second one was on a family level. I felt when I was engaged with her that I was only half a life, and now my life had become whole by my lifelong and eternal covenant of marriage with her. When I went to Korea to meet her family, I was embraced so warmly, so deeply by her family, especially her mom. She made the greatest food for breakfast every day. It was just unbelievable. I'd never experienced so much personal love, and so, warmly welcomed into their household. So I wasn't just marrying their daughter. I was marrying the whole family, and through them, I was marrying the whole culture in a way. And it was just, I think East and West need to unite. And I feel that I'm, for whatever reason, have sort of a bridge mentality where I can have a foot in both worlds, East and West. And so my children reflect that. They are Amerasian, as the saying goes. Mm-hmm. And I'm very happy with that sort of global perspective.
Okay, very clear. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I really appreciate that. What are the biggest challenges and threats facing the institution of marriage today, both here in America and throughout the world?
Let's start externally. I think the economics, the technological, advanced economic society we live in is quite, in the developed world, is very revolutionary. We don't realize what a revolution in lifestyle it's created. And it has enabled human beings to live without families and to live quite well. And in fact, it almost rewards people for not having a family, for being more mobile, for being 24/7, for being unencumbered by family relationships. So you can just get into the job, you can be in the office, you can be the creator, you can be the leader, you can be the worker, and you can be very prosperous that way. And everything is set up in society to make you happy as an individual. You have a nice apartment, there's the entertainment, there's the communications, there's the transportation. And that, of course, where's the family? It's like having a spouse, having children, having parents are a kind of a distraction, an albatross around slowing you down. So I think this advanced economic, technological society is much more detrimental to families than we like to realize. My sister lives in Houston, and my parents passed away, but they lived in California. I live in New York. We're a continent apart. My wife's family lives in Korea. My daughter lives in Toronto. So because we can do this, we do this. So still we have this kind of, the peak value for human beings is myself, realizing my own potential. And where I came from, my family, my parents, in the culture is secondary. And people are so excited. It's so great. We're accomplishing so many things by these great individuals fulfilling their potential, that the human race is on this big kind of adrenaline rush right now. And families are left in the background. Serial marriages, that I'm going to fulfill myself, so I'm going to find my personal happiness, so I've got to find the perfect spouse. The perfect spouse. Where is she? Where is he? I found him or her. And we have the romantic infatuation and emotions and the hormones are going. And 5 years later, well, I've grown out of this relationship, perhaps. Maybe I'm into another stage of my life, serial marriage. As long as the paradigm is individual-based, marriage is going to come up. And as long as there's so many social supports, not just for men, but for women, to live a single life, to be independent, marriage and family is going to suffer. So I think those are the sort of external social dynamics that are breaking down the family.
And what about the remnants from the sexual revolution of the 60s?
Oh, well, the sexual revolution was the manifestation. That's when all this technology began to hit. Birth control, mobility, communications. You didn't need... the 50s, the 40s, the 50s were prosperous, so American young people, European young people were not tied to the family shop, to the family farm, to the family business. In fact, there isn't room for me, so I'm going to go off on my own. And so, and along with that, Freudian ideas, different philosophies of liberation from the past, liberation from traditions, liberation from social mores, i.e. liberation from sexual restraints or constraints.
If it feels good, do it, in a sense.
If it feels good, do it. Why be bound by, what's the real argument for the marriage contract? Why is that important? And the establishment couldn't give good answers because there were too many values in the society that were undermining all those answers. So when I asked my own parents said, well, you should save yourself for marriage, you should value marriage, I go, well, why? And I asked my minister, well, why? Well, they didn't really have a good answer. So the sexual revolution, which a friend of mine, Robert Kittle, calls, it's really the selfishness revolution. because it's all about me. And so, but marriage is a demanding commitment. Marriage is something that requires an incredible ability to love, strength to love another person. You're going through your changes, your spouse is going through their changes, along come children, they're going through all of their changes, and your expectations are always being challenged or dashed, and so the raw core of my commitment, am I committed to this marriage beyond other things, beyond my own satisfaction or my own job or my own career? Am I committed to this marriage beyond my own dream world of the ideal spouse is going to make me happy? That's challenged. And if you're not, then the marriage is going to suffer. I think marriage draws out from human beings the deepest strengths of our character, to be able to expand and to embrace a person of the opposite sex. And I do consider marriage to be defined by two sexes, the wholeness of the creation, of the created order, the yin and the yang, the male and the female, the wholeness of what's there being bound together in a spiritual and physical relationship.
Okay, thank you very much. What have you discovered to be the most effective way of providing young adults with the tools and resources they need to build a happy and lasting marriage?
Well, I think spiritual, religious upbringing is really important. But even maybe more important than that is seeing their own parents, loving each other. The model that comes from pre-linguistic stage, sleeping. I mean, I know some people are afraid to do this, but we always did it. Having the baby in between the mom and dad on the bed, that warm skin touch, seeing the parents love each other, affectionate toward each other. Of course, having parents who themselves are able to maintain the marriage. My parents, God bless them, had a lifelong marriage. And so just for me, when I thought of marriage, I thought it's lifelong. And my wife the same. So the model of the parents is extremely important. Signals from the culture are very important. Of course, they're pretty deteriorated at this point, but there are a lot of pro-family things in the culture. And then religious values, religious training, spiritual training, that God likes marriage, that marriage is a high expression of love. And then once a young person becomes a teenager and is encountering awareness, consciousness of the opposite sex, then I think it's good to have intelligent sex education. But I think the real sex education you get from your own parents, seeing your own parents. And sex education in schools should be more character education and centered on this is something I picked up from Thomas Lacona a few months ago. Sex education should actually be marriage education.
Tell us more about that.
Well, in secular sex education, as far as I've encountered it, is pretty clinical. It's sort of science-based, and it sort of kind of reifies human beings as bodies. Well, here's a sexual organ. It looks like this, and it functions like this. Like you're looking at a specimen abstracted from a real living spiritual person, which is the worst kind of a scientism. Abstracting the spirit or the personality from the value from the physical world. Your sexual organ does this, it has to do it every 3 or 4 days, or you're not going to be healthy, and like that. Sex education. What I like is little kids, for my kids, when they were little, they walk in the bathroom, before they were kind of sensitive about that kind of thing. They walk in, and there you are, using the toilet, and your little child walks in and looks, and they're very interested. And that's their sex education. That sexual organ is not just like this scientific thing on a chart. It's my father. That's my dad. There's a person there. There's a personality involved. I think that's sex. That's true sex education.
Mm-hmm. And then you mentioned about that sex education should be for marriage education.
Toward marriage.
Say more about that.
Well, we want to lift up the ideal. Young people are idealistic by nature. And the large majority of young people, if asked, would they like to have a lifelong committed marriage? They'll say, yes, of course I would. Even if their parents, especially if their parents are divorced, they even more want to have that kind. So let's talk about that ideal. It's like Stephen Covey, begin with the end in mind. The end is an ideal marriage, a wonderful, fulfilled relationship, one-on-one, monogamous marriage. That's a wonderful ideal. That's what we want. Nothing else. That's what I dream of. Okay? Now let's work backwards. What do we have to do to get there? Well, we're not going to be having promiscuous sex. We're not going to be playing around. We're not going to be unfaithful and pornography.
Well, can you say something about what are some of the complications or problems or ramifications of premarital sex?
There's a whole set of negative consequences emotionally: rage, anger, disappointment, resentment, depression. The symptoms of depression are quite highly correlated with sexual promiscuity. For young women, of course, abortions, which are very traumatic, or giving up a child for adoption, or even becoming a mother way too soon and having that disrupt one's education, not to mention emotional development.
What about spiritually?
Spiritually, premature sex derails us from our highest ideals. There's an author, Alan Bloom, who wrote a book called The Closing of the American Mind. He was a professor for 30 or 40 years at the University of Chicago. He said that his best students, he was a professor of philosophy, so he liked students who were seeking the truth, who were really zealous, who were really searching, who were really challenging themselves and him to discover the way, the truth, the life, etc. He said these were the kids who were pure. The virgins were the ones who had this energy, this spiritual energy. He found the kids who were promiscuous, who were having boyfriends, girlfriends, cohabiting, as a generalization, settling for less.
Okay.
Not so excited about life, not so interested in learning. More, well, I'd like to just get a job. I'd like to find, something comfortable. They lost that burning zeal or passion. Idealism. So that's a spiritual effect. I think with premature sex comes a callousness, a diminution of the value of sexuality. The first love is something very, very special, and if it's something that's followed up by a breakage in the relationship, then it's like love itself is flawed. And if love is flawed, then what is there to live for? Well, money and material and a house and so forth. But the deepest desires of human beings is love. And if love itself becomes corrupted, then there's no place to go.
Okay, very clear. Thank you. You mentioned marriage preparation. What else can single people and married couples do to best go about building a foundation for lasting, happy marriages?
I think we should be lifelong learners in terms of our own spiritual growth. And here's something that we can do as individuals, our own study, our own prayer life, our own life of service for others. I think is really important.
So to find a spiritual path that really feeds you spiritually.
That gives you a resource. We can't expect our spouse to be the one to feed us all the time. You know, they need to be fed by us. So we need to have an inner source, inner resources for those difficult times, and those come from our own development of our own spirituality, whether it be through a biblical path, a Jewish or Christian, a Islamic path, a Buddhist path. I think that a unificationist, path, the Latter-day Saints. There's a clear correlation between religious practice and successful marriage. It's, documented all over the place that people who participate in religious community life have happier marriages. People who participate in religious life have better sex lives.
And why is that?
Well, when it comes down to it, religions are pretty positive about sexuality.
In most cases.
In most cases, within the realm of God's
fidelity,
created order.
Okay.
Of
faithful marriage.
Of faith, of commitment, that sexuality is a part of the order of creation. Sex requires trust. So if there's trust between the husband and wife, that I'm not going to disappear, or she's not going to disappear tomorrow morning, or next month, or next year, or ever. Trust is a foundation for love, for the expression of love.
So you feel religious people who are devoutly religious, that deepens the level of trust within the marriage. It strengthens the foundation for the marriage and leads to better quality of conjugal love.
That I know my husband, I know my wife is committed to this relationship. And even if we go through some rocky times, we'll come out the other side. I trust this person. They're consistent. There's compassion. I think my understanding is that there's a difference between men and women on this count. That men tend to be more physically motivated, and it's much more of a physical energy. Whereas women look at things much more holistically. Can I trust this man? Is he being honest with me? Is he sincere in his love? Is he responsible for the outcome of our relationship, i.e. children? If that's there, then they have a capacity to respond to the man's love and the man's hopes and dreams and ideals. And I think this it relates to the fact that women tend to be more religious than men.
Okay.
Women tend to be the more active participants in the religious community.
More pious
than
in
the
a
men.
sense.
They value these communal values, these social values that hold families together. Within that stable net of relationships, it's easier for a woman to respond to her husband's love. And hence, you've got a better sex life.
Okay, well, it's a very interesting explanation. Thank you. What are the most important values and principles for forming a God-centered, loving marriage and family?
Well, I always have to refer to my own experience,
Sure.
right? So I'm thinking, what works in my family? What is key? I think it's being, in the long run, it's fidelity. It's consistency, it's warmth, it's sensitivity to my spouse's situation or what she's going through. It's tolerance. It's giving her space.
Acceptance, in a sense.
Yeah, accepting who she is may not be what I thought she
your
was.
Concepts.
One good little metaphor for me is when I put my arm around her shoulder and we're walking together. Now, when I first did that, I really wanted us to walk exactly the same. Right foot, left foot, right foot, left foot. We're right in sync, we're right in rhythm, we're totally one, here we are. But it doesn't work like that. She and I walk differently. So I'm going up and she's going down, and I'm going a little forward and she's backwards, and I'm going a little to the right and she's going a little to the left. So I had to let my arm be very loose in a way, give her a lot of space so that we could walk together but at our own pace and with our own rhythms. So that's a metaphor, I think, for the relationship. There has to be a certain kind of looseness to it, a loose affiliation. A friend of mine, when I was in graduate school, he was Korean, and he knew that I had a Korean fiancée. So he wanted to give me some advice. And it was advice that I never forgot because it was so true. He said, sometimes she will withdraw. She'll be going through something, and let her go through it. Give her 3 days. Just pull back and, loosen up, cool your engines, cool your jets, whatever. Give her 3 days.
Rather than look at it as something's wrong and you need to fix it.
Yeah, something's wrong. What's going on? What can I do? Being like super uptight and like that. And I think that vice versa. She has to give, me space too.
So it's part of the whole men are from Mars, women are from Venus. It's understanding the different realities for men and women, which are very distinct.
So be comfortable with who your spouse is, and not to just demand that they meet your expectations. Think about how am I meeting her expectations. There's always going to be hurts. So that's why the commitment to the marriage is, the element of commitment is so important. That there's an absolute in our lives, and that is that we are husband and wife. That's absolute. As they say, till death do us part. And in sickness and in health.
I would imagine you'd go one step further and say that it's an eternal relationship.
I can't think of anyone who I know who, no matter what religion, if I said, "Well, you're going to be together with your spouse in the next life," would say, "Yeah," would agree with that, or would feel very good about that.
On that note, I want to thank you so much for having been our guest today on The Defining Moment. It's really been fascinating, Dr. Hendricks, to listen to everything you've shared. Thank you so much for being our guest today.
It's been my pleasure, Bret. Thank you very much.
You've been watching The Defining Moment for Creating the Culture of Conscience. You can find us on the internet at www.definingmoment.tv. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.